So welcome to Photographer's Critique. We're going to go fast through a lot of images. So I'm not sure if we'll get to all of the images. I'll try my best to get through all of them. I think there's about 36, so that doesn't leave a lot of time for each. But I do have some notes already. I've looked at all of them. I've made some adjustments to a couple of suggestions. Anything that I haven't gotten into during this session, or if you want to dive deeper into something, maybe I brought something up that you want to learn how to do, or maybe you want to just have a conversation about it, or anything not pertaining to these photos as well, please feel free to sign up for the one-on-one coaching. It is offered to you, and please take advantage of that. A small introduction, at least, of who I am and where I've been and that kind of thing, and maybe some of you have read the bio. So I'll give you the 30-year span in less than 60 seconds. Started off at Brooks in the 90s, so Brooks Institute of Photography. 4x5 film cameras, very technical study there. Spent a couple years, got a scholarship to Kansas City Art Institute, studied painting. Got a degree, BFA there in painting. Started a master's degree, finished that in 2001. Moved to Spain, lived there for 10 years, became a commercial photographer, taught at a university in Spain, taught photography. Photoshop, production, post-production, whole bunch of classes online and in person, and then moved to New York, spent another 10 years, worked at FIT and Medgar Evers, doing video, photo, post-production, that kind of thing, and also just always being a photographer. So I was an adjunct professor at those universities, but throughout the time, I was always a commercial photographer. So a lot of portrait, fashion, and a lot of products, always a lot of products. So my workflow is capture one, shooting raw, tethered, almost always, Bridge, Adobe Bridge, and then Photoshop. I rarely use Lightroom unless I need to use like the denoise, dehaze, and maybe some moire. I use those things in Lightroom sometimes, but Adobe Camera Raw can do that too. So anyway, that's enough about me. Let's get into you guys. So we're gonna start with April here. So I have them in Bridge. This is Bridge right here. And if you've never used Bridge, it's a good viewing program. So you're able to see all images and that kind of thing. It's a very easy program to use. To speed things up, I'll just kind of group these together and then make some comments. What's working? Your light, both ambient and flash, your composition, your framing, you're playing with color temperatures, you have a non-conventional approach, I'd say, and you're questioning, and that's good, right? So a couple of things to consider. In terms of the proximity of backgrounds to the subject, I'd like to maybe see you branch out into maybe the outside, or at least in studio, have some more space around your subjects. I know the video game is really cool, and if it wasn't for the name at the top, I'd kind of be like, where is she? But I like the framing of that arcade game, but you can still tell that that background is still within maybe 3 feet of her. The green screen is really close, and then the black background on the other one, you know that there's a wall somewhere at some point. Be careful of the eyes. If I could zoom in here, you see how there's a lot of white in the eyes. So I'd just be careful in terms of doing that. Even if you like the positioning of the face, you can tell your person to stay where they're at and just glance over at you. Like literally, you know, you can either show them physically if they moved, because a lot of times you're like, turn, you know, move your eyes over here, and they're actually going to move their head unless they're a trained model and they could just move their eyes. So the instinctual movement is like, you're facing over here. If you guys can see me, if I'm facing here, the last thing I'm going to do is move my eyes over. So you might want to just tell her, look at a certain thing on the wall, or look at that corner, or point to a direction that you want her to look at. And then you won't get so much white in her eyes, and just play with that and just be aware of that. Really, post-production on this hair, I would say there's a lot of photorealists that are painters, and they paint with very thin brushes, and they paint hair like that. So each individual strand is painted, and you can do that in Photoshop. And again, with one-on-one sessions, if you want to know how I do it, please feel free to sign up. I'll show you how I would do that. And I mean, it depends on how much they're paying you, how much time you want to spend with this photo, how much it means to you, and that kind of thing. But you can certainly make it look like this black background was there. Okay, so, and that's one thing, just a side note, with post-production, make sure that your post-production isn't seen. It's just kind of behind the scenes. So it doesn't look like, it's like, how'd they do that? Instead of like, oh, that's just, Photoshop. Another thing is the poses. So I would try and get the poses to be a little more dynamic and less static. I know that the hips on the right photo, if you can see my cursor, they're kind of like very frontal. And the middle photo, her shoulders are very frontal. The other one's 3/4, almost profile, but maybe she could drop a shoulder, she could drop that hip. I think you have a lot of things going on that are really good. So you're pushing the limits, you're courageous, you're daring, you're willing to try new things. And I think you're in a good spot because you're striving for mastery. So that's good. So just continue to push. I think that's a good place to be. So I created some PSDs with these. So you'll see I'll just turn on and off the layers here. And I'm just using Photoshop. I go up here to arrange and 3 vertical. So portraits, kind of in a sense, at least the middle one is almost like an environmental portrait. So you like lighting, you've created some emotion, some drama, and a mood, and that's really important. A couple things in terms of this photo. Let's say this is just a little lighting thing. I just created this curve and you can see this in this mask. Basically, it's adding a tiny bit of light for her legs and maybe her back and maybe her hair. Okay, so just a quick side note on this photo in particular. There's like a sneaky hand, right? So her left hand is kind of sneaking into her back under her arm. Maybe try what if her hand was going around her arm instead of just like coming up through. So that's possibly a concern here. And then this hair right here, I'd probably, see if you could get rid of that because is that really necessary? And one thing I always think about, if it's there, it should have a purpose. If it's not there, it doesn't need to be there. So can you get rid of it? Absolutely. You can certainly get rid of that. And then the hand, that's just something, maybe you have different shots or something, but I would probably get rid of that. And then I'd maybe lighten this a bit. I do like this dress. However, this bracelet here, and I know she's probably maybe a senior or something, but I wonder if she has something on the other arm because I feel that the bracelet doesn't really go with the dress. And I know this isn't, she's not maybe a professional model or something, and this isn't like a shoot for the dress company. But what if you told her to spin around, do the same exact pose, just change arms, and then maybe you can adjust your light accordingly, and then she wouldn't have that bracelet on her arm. In terms of lighting on this one as well, I just kind of open that up a tiny bit, if you can see that. Here, I'll show you the before and the after. So I'm just, getting a little more light in here, a little here, and you can see the mask of kind of what I painted. So what's not in red is what's showing through the mask. And then this is the curve. So it's just a curve and I put it in blend mode luminosity, just so it just affects the light. And then this one on the other side. So a couple of things. I tried a little bit of liquefy. It seems that she's athletic. So I thought maybe this is her upper traps. It's a little, it protrudes a little bit. So I thought maybe just bring it down if you could see that tiny bit. Maybe that helps. And then this hat looked a little blue to me, so I just made it a little gray, and then I did a little vignette, so I darkened kind of around. So these are the masks right there. So that's just kind of what I did. But I like all the shots. I think they're good in terms of creating a feeling, a mood, the environment, the framing is nice, the cropping is good. And so, yeah. All right, so let's check out David's. All right, so we have these 3 photos. Let's see, arrange 3 vertical. All right, I just created a couple things on here. So the rocky cliff, the diagonal lines, they're leading into the bottom of the page, which is good. And what I find is like, I want to rest down at the bottom corner. And it's interesting that it's all of these leading lines kind of lead to that. And I can like almost feel the sand, and I think that's a good thing. That's a good, at least memory for me because I'm from California. So I can relate to being there with a nice calm water with the sand, that kind of thing. In terms of photo, I tried black and white to see what that would look like. And I also just tried a small vignette, but just did the vignette in the corner here. So basically this curve, it's just a tiny bit darker everywhere else and left the brightness of the beach. Now, your eye is going to go to the brightest spot. So in some sense, you might want to bring this area down a tiny bit, but the white does lead me down there as well. But I would maybe, I know it's either sunset or sunrise, and that's, you're getting that real intense yellow, but maybe just density wise, you can bring that down a tiny bit. And let's see, in terms of butterflies, let's talk about that. All right, so with this one, I just changed a couple of things here, and this is just a suggestion. And just remember, like, I'm just another person. I have a subjective viewpoint. In no means am I like the authority, the end all be all. It's just, take it for what it is. These are just suggestions as what I would do if I were to encounter this. If I shot this, what would I do? Right. So I basically lightened everything up except the bottom part, and that's reflected in the mask here. And then I did the opposite here, and you can see that. So I darkened everything, and you can see there's the curve for the top one, and the white part of the mask is what's showing. And you can see this curve, how it's darkened, and you can see this curve, how it's lightened, right? So they're just basically opposites. Okay, so if I turn them off and on, I basically equalized them. I darkened the foreground and lightened the butterflies a little bit. But I think composition wise, I like the colors, the movement, the interaction, the bokeh. I like all those things. Okay, here's the mallards. If this is the crop, let's say, right? So I could either, that's how it was, right? And then I'm thinking, well, maybe that top part we don't really need. Like, is that top part helping us? I don't really feel that it is, and maybe the left-hand side isn't either. So what if we just cropped it like that, and maybe that's our shot? Well, it depends on the ratio that you need to print and the size that you want and that kind of thing. Or if you already have a frame, then you have that situation. But I would decrease the greens a tiny bit. You can kind of see just a hint of, I went into hue and saturation, and I think I changed maybe the greens just a hair. And I think the blues, there's some blue around here. You can see the blue in the shadows. And all shadows, as you guys know, shadows are colder, so shadows are going to be blue. So I think I went into the blues, selected the midtone blue, and decreased just the blues, and that blend mode is in color in here on the hue saturation layer. It's very faint. Then I created a vignette around those, and then the opposite vignette here. Okay, so that's like the before and after. And basically, I'm just bringing those mallards out so you're able to see them. But I really love this golden reflection. It's beautiful. It's amazing. So things to consider. Yeah, so the 2/3, you don't need that top third, I don't think. And the bokeh, maybe you could do some blur around them, perhaps. So my intention in doing this was really to just make those mallards pop a little more. And you can see that reflected in these two curves right here. So I'm just kind of lightening the center, darkening the edges, but trying to make it look realistic. And you can always put this into luminosity mode instead of normal mode, and that's just going to affect the light. So there's the blend change. It's ever so slight, but if you prefer that, maybe that's the way to go. I think that pretty much wraps it up for that. Again, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I know I'm kind of on a mission here, but feel free to interject as you wish. So Donna, the right-hand side, this portrait, let's start with that one. So awesome portrait, frankly, really like it. It looks, I like the contrast, the expression, the bokeh, the lighting, the composition. And one thing that I could comment on is, you can sense he's maybe like a cattle rancher or some sort of person that works maybe outside is my guess, because I can see some hairs here. There's a couple of hairs over here. I don't know if you can see it right there and right here. And then this little spot, I wonder how many, and then this little spot here. So let's just leave those all circled. Like, do you need these? I don't know. And that's just a question. And then do you need this little hair here and that little hair there? And there's like maybe these two here, there, right? So you're the artist. Probably the only one, maybe the most important one is this one that I get rid of because it's not really serving us. That's not really doing anything. Maybe these hairs add character, and the dust and his eyebrow that is maybe a little long, and this beard or this goatee and this kind of thing. Like, maybe it adds character. I think that's up to the artist's interpretation, frankly. I couldn't say, yes, you have to, you should. I wouldn't say that, but I would say that about about that white spot right here. I would definitely get rid of that. The others, I think, are character, and I think it adds to him. Now, if they bother you or if they're in the print and it's like maybe this little white speck up here, it's like, oh, I just, my eye always goes to that on the print, then, get rid of it. So sometimes doing test prints before doing more expensive large prints, you'd be able to see things differently than if you saw them on the screen. So I think that's a good thing to remember. But I do think this portrait is successful. Let me just get rid of this guy. All right. I like the bokeh in the left one. I like the colors in the right. I like all the action in your photos because it's engaging and you're creating a mood, you're creating a moment. And that's really important in photography, especially compared to video or something. This is like a one moment, it happened, you captured it, and that's a good thing. Just think about the bokeh in the right one and think about the color in the left one. Be careful of over sharpening. You could sense that some of these white lines over here on the right hand side are a little maybe over sharpened. So just be careful when you do that. And maybe it's not a global sharpening. I mean, if you're in Photoshop, here's your layers right here, right? If you just copy this layer and then go up to wherever it is, sharpen and go to unsharpen mask, and maybe your unsharpened mask is, say that's the way you like it. Well, you can put a mask on that, blacken the mask, and then with the eraser tool, you can literally just come in here and erase parts of that, and you can see how that's reflected on the mask there. I'm obviously not being careful with it, but you can just sharpen those areas and not everything else around it. And then that's just basically something that to keep in mind, right? So usually when I sharpen things, it's not a global sharpening, meaning like all of it. If it's a person, maybe the eyelashes, maybe the eyes, maybe the lips, maybe the nostrils, not the whole entire thing. And same with birds, right? If there's certain feathers or certain areas that you want to accentuate, then I would certainly sharpen those and make sure everything else doesn't get sharpened. I would like to see some sky in some bird photos. I know obviously you're at the mercy of where they are and where you happen to be, and that's just the way it's going to be. But definitely think about horizon lines and that kind of thing. But your colors look good, the contrast looks good. Again, you captured the moment, and that's important. So I think these are awesome. Any comments or questions on those? All right, so cognac glass. I like the simplicity. I like the minimalistic approach to color, the horizon line, and the one drop on the plexiglass right in here, right? Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Right there, right? I think that if there were 2 drops or 3 drops, it wouldn't be as significant as just one. So it's kind of a pensive moment. It's like, why is there only 1 drop? Something you might want to consider, obviously, when the quality of glass and that you can see that kind of in here and also in there. So as you get, and then also here, the quality of glass will matter. I remember doing shoots for different companies and different bottles, and I'd ask for multiples, maybe cases of bottles in some instances, because all the bottles that they gave me in the beginning had imperfections. So the better quality glass you get, the less imperfections usually you have. So just be mindful of that. So don't expect perfection out of something that isn't perfect. The more pre-production you can do, the less post-production you'll do. I would clean up some of these highlights in here, like there, and maybe these, maybe not, but certainly some in there. Maybe a graduation in the of tone, black to gray or gray to black in the plexi, and see if you can create some sort of gradation in there. But I like it. This is not an easy shot. You're pushing the limits, and it's good. Think about that incident angle though when you do gradation. All right. Jim. So you're doing, I see one of them is infrared, and that's the center one. If anyone's done infrared, it's past the visible spectrum, right? So it's like 700 to 900 nanometers. I do want to say a couple just general things. You're concentrated on the relationship between the land and sky, which I think is an interesting place to be. You're concerned with composition, whether the land takes up most of the real estate or if the sky does. I think you're very conscious of that, and I think that's good. The white sands light is really nice. That's the one here on the left-hand side. And the IR is really cool. I wonder if you can get more contrast in the foreground though. And I just added some of that. And I know with IR infrared, you'll get a hot spot in the center, and mirrorless cameras are a little better for that, but you will get this sort of hot spot in there. So I would just be conscious of that. So I just added a few things here. This is just a mask on that. And then here is like a vignette. So, and there's my curve. Now you're in grayscale. So when doing a gray, make sure, unless specified, you want to still be in red, green, and blue, and I can show you how to do that. So because in grayscale, you're going to get rid of a whole lot of information. Your gradations aren't going to be as smooth unless you were using all channels like red, green, blue. So it becomes a conversation of how to do that. So these are just opposite. Basically, when you look at this curve, it's the opposite in grayscale. So this would be darkening rather than lightening, even though you see that way. So I would just suggest maybe a little bit more contrast and kind of blend that hot spot so that hot spot isn't so hot, and then kind of lighten some things around. Be careful of the blacks. Maybe I made the blacks actually a little too black up there, but that would be a suggestion for that one. And then with this one, it could be cool in black and white. One thing about all of these, hang on, is I feel that there's a kind of drifting off to the left, meaning like the horizon line is not straight. So here's a line here, and maybe the horizon is like that. I wasn't there to know, but if I just put some guides, you can just kind of see where that horizon line is, right? This one on the right-hand side is a little different, but definitely on the left one, it's kind of drifting over to the left. The middle one's drifting over to the left. So just be aware of how you want that horizon line to be in terms of straight across, or maybe you did it on purpose. So totally fine if you did. I would say some sort of helpful things: show more foreground. I think the landscape photographers, I think a general thing to think of, and I'm more of a macro shooter now. I just photograph flowers mainly. Macro is about the background and landscape is about the foreground. I think when you see really good landscape shots that you really like, there will be some foreground in there, and just take note of that. And I think on the one on the right over here, I think if you did show more foreground, you might be a little more successful with that. I did do almost like a dehaze or something, added a tiny bit of contrast just to get a little bit, and then added a vignette here. So just darkened the center, and then this is just a curve for a hint of contrast. And then I grouped them and then decreased the opacity of that group to 44%, right? So that's the before and after. Minor change, but I would definitely be thinking about maybe having a little more foreground in all of these shots. And you might want to look at Ansel Adams' work, New Mexico, because I know these were shot in New Mexico. You might want to check out a lot of Ansel Adams' New Mexico work. He did some amazing things there. And then if you're using a filter, or if you have a converted IR camera, then that's something to consider too. If you are using filters, you might want to consider getting another camera and then converting it into infrared. I know some places that do that. If you want, just let me know and I'll send you a link to a couple camera companies that do that, camera stores, I should say, that do that conversion if you haven't done it already. Let me just double check this chat here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Can I talk about the horizon line? Sorry, Harley. So the horizon line, meaning like where that black and white met, Harley, that was what I was referring to. Where that intersection is, you might want to lower it, you might want to raise it. It's going to create a different mood or a different attitude when it's lower or higher. And speaking of attitude, we have a lot of attitude here. So this is Joe. All right, so what's working? I like the perspectives. I like the lens choices, the awareness of the horizon line, speaking about that. And you can see how low that horizon line is within that frame. I like the saturated colors, the hand positioning, and the expressions. One thing to keep in mind is that all of these are very frontal, and we know that creates drama, it creates intimidation. But you might want to test out not being so frontal and see what that looks like. And I'm sure you've already done that, but at least those three that you submitted, this is, That's what I'm seeing. And I know your style because I've seen your work before. So I know it's like this dark, dramatic look, but you might, here's a suggestion. Let's talk about this one, for example. These are just my suggestions here. This is just a couple of things. Lighting the legs, I just kind of created a curve and just kind of lit those legs a little bit and did some light painting for her arms. That might do a little bit. And then this is for the hair. Same thing on there. That's just lighting up that hair. So here's before and after. It's not imperative, but I would think about doing that on the hair on this one because we're really talking about black shirt, black hair. Here's the before and after. And you can see how those details, and again, when you print, especially on metal, it's a high saturated, high contrast medium. The blacks are going to get blacker. So if your blacks are already black, here, right? And here's your info down here. And I could hover over and you can see the numbers down here in the bottom right. So I'm at 1, 2, 6, maybe 20, 15, all that kind of thing. So digital zone system, real quick, is each zone, you got 10 zones, 0 to 255. Each zone is 25.5 points of density. So you're not even into zone 1 if you're under 25.5. And again, we could go over this in detail some other date, but you want to just kind of scroll around here and you know this is going to be really black. So think about possibly opening it up. So that's what I did here. And I just painted with a mask on certain areas here. And then this is just the whites. This is just the whites here. And then that's just a little lighter there. Okay. And then I grouped them and decreased the opacity on the entire group to 90%. So that just brings that out. That ensures me that when I now hover over some of these areas, I'm coming down here to look at these numbers. I know that some of these numbers are more like in the 35s and the 40s and the 25s. You know that some of that texture will show up. That would be my recommendation of that. And then this one, I just did a couple things I created. Let's just do this individually. So that is just a tiny hint of increasing the light for her hair. And this is the mask on that. So her glove just brought some of that out, a little bit on the hair and a little bit on the helmet. There's the before and after. And then this is just a darkening gradient of just that grass right there. And that's just the before and after. That's before and after. But I like the style and I like this dark approach. And I think the insistence on trying new perspectives is beneficial when it comes to portraiture, because after shooting so many seniors, you're kind of like, well, let's do something new. So I'd like that insistence on perspectives, on the concepts, on the compositions, the designs, and you're not afraid to take chances. And I think that's a really good place to be. So Joe's saying 3 images where it was 90 in camera, 90%. Oh, 90% as in you didn't do any post-production? Is that what you're referring to? Okay, yeah, cool. Any other questions on these? Well, I just learned what the difference is between a possum and opossum. Someone came into my office and they informed me pretty well, so I was happy about that because I honestly did not know that. Raymond says, "Will you work on images in either Lightroom, Luminar, or Photoshop?" So I do have Luminar. I do use Lightroom sometimes, but the majority of the editing is in Photoshop. Sometimes you can kind of go seamlessly between Lightroom and Photoshop, but I feel that Photoshop is a better editing program. You can do all adjustments in there. It is daunting though if you haven't used it yet because the learning curve is a lot steeper than Photoshop. Luminar, if I do use Luminar, I create an extra layer on that and then I'm able to change the blend mode, change the opacity. It's not a destructive way of working, so I always use it on a different layer if I'm in Photoshop. Okay? Photoshop's going to be your best friend for sure. All right, so we got some animals. So what's working? I like the solidarity. I like the interactions, the colors, the bokeh, the composition. The bobcat, I like the stance. And so I went ahead and took some liberties on this photo. Hope you don't mind. But I did a little generative fill. This was the original. And this part back here, I wanted to just see what generative fill could do. And I just selected that area, right-clicked, and did generative fill. And that kind of got rid of that area. So I was kind of bothered by the dark spot. It kept competing with, I'm guessing this is a bobcat. It kept competing with the bobcat. So I said, let's just see what it looks like. And I kind of like it a little better. So just the thought with that one. The opossums, I do like the bokeh and the colors. I just did a quick little thing here on that, and that is just a increase of light, and the opacity is pretty low on that. And then this one is just a vignette around it, just darkening, just creating a little more focus to that center image. But I like the focus, the sharpening, the bokeh, and the colors. The bears, I did a couple things on here just to see, because sometimes I have some comments and I want to see what it looks like, because after making these comments, I want to really make sure that it might actually work and looks better. So I created a duplicate of this layer and then blurred it. And you can see the blur there a little bit. And then I blurred the whole entire thing and then put a mask on it. And there's the mask. So I just masked out the bears and blurred everything else. Okay. And then this is just a curve darkening. You can see the curve here. I'm just darkening some areas and basically everything except the bear. And excuse the messiness of the mask because I'm doing this pretty quick. Whether it's better or not, I don't know. I just wanted to see what that would look like, because I think it kind of added a little more drama. You know, bears always fight all the time. So it's like this bear has his eyes closed. It looks like he's kissing the other one and the other one's smiling, at least to me. And I'm used to seeing bears fighting instead of this sweet gesture. So that's pretty cool. So a couple of things. The bobcat, I would maybe darken the snow. There, some of these highlights, and I didn't do this, but some of these highlights could be darkened just a tad. And maybe the bokeh could be a little more drastic. Blur the background just a tiny bit more. And then the bear, just a quick side note, the bottom, I don't know if you have more of this photo, but I would like to see some of the feet. And I know that a leaf or something is actually covering that foot, but I would like to see a little bit more of kind of what they're standing on, because I think it would give it a little more context. But I like the moments. You definitely captured the moments really well. And I like the focus, the color, the bokeh. That's all good. So good job. Any questions on those? All right, Linda. I think what's working are the colors in the two outside ones. And I think the number 3, which is the one on the left, I think that's the best one. It's the most intentional. I think you used maybe 200 lens at f2.8, I want to say. I think I saw the metadata, if I remember correctly. And I like the horizon line down here. So that horizon line in Harley, this is what I'm talking about, that horizon line right there. So I really like where that sits. Okay, so number 1, this is number 1 over here on the right-hand side. So if you shoot inside, you might want to think about blurring the background a little more, using complementary colors to make your subject pop. You could warm up those colors and possibly get even lower, because we don't need to see this, you know, transformer or whatever that is down there. So I'd probably get rid of that. But I like the expression, definitely, of that dog. And this second one, the one in the middle, this downward angle right here, you know, all of that. And it kind of disrupts the flow to me. I don't know how you feel about it. So you have not only, you know, red over here, beige, blue, green, and then the green split up. Maybe it's because the green split up here and the green split up there, you know, all these intersecting lines is very competing. And I feel that there's a lot of competition in the background compared to just looking at a cute dog. And that's what I think the left one has. Not only is the stance kind of peculiar and quirky and fun, but the background doesn't compete like the background in the second one. But I think that, what is that, like a Shih Tzu maybe? Super cute dog. I would like to see that in black and white and see what that looks like, though, because maybe unifying just within grays instead of contrasting colors could possibly help that. But I like that you're at their level. Most of these shots are pretty much at their level, and I think that's really good. You're low, and that's important. Anytime you look down on something, I think it's condescending, but when you look up, then you're creating strength. So when you're at a dog's level, I think you're kind of speaking their language. And same thing with portraiture too. You don't want to see those under chins. If you're too low, it depends on the chin as well. Okay. Any comments or questions there? Lynn. All right, so we got one image here, landscape. So I like the composition. I think the elements are interesting. There's different levels, as in tiers, and lots of space, lots of depth. I like how the trees are higher than the mountains from your vantage point. I think that creates an interesting dynamic. I believe, so again, you're in grayscale and you want to be in RGB, okay? You would want to be here, and to create a gray, you would come, I usually do it here in the view adjustment layer, create a hue and saturation, put hue and saturation into color mode, that's the blend mode, and then take my saturation and desaturate it like that. So if this was in color, that's a black and white right there, but you're still in RGB, right? And that would be gray. There's absolutely no dominant color, okay? And then you'll have a lot more information. Your levels are going to be better. Your gradations are going to be smoother. Try a dehaze maybe to increase the contrast in the background. So you can try a dehazing filter. Lightroom does a pretty good job, and Adobe Camera Raw does as well. But I do like that the context is shown very well. So you can just imagine what this feels like to stand on your front door or porch or whatever way that's facing. I don't know if this is the back or the front. This looks like the back. So maybe your front living room is facing these mountains, and you can kind of get a feel of that whole context. And I think you captured it really well. All right, we got a few more. Well, these are fun. All right, Michael, a few nature shots. All right, what's working? I like the colors, the composition, the format, the leading lines, the skies. Okay, so number one, let's start with number one. Number one's over here on the right. I like the diagonal line. The person is perfectly placed in there, if you can see that. You got a person in there. I like the tiers of mountains. It's almost like the foreground is the sand, and it's also part of the background since it takes up so much real estate. I think that's a good thing. The second one, it's an interesting concept. It's certainly hard to line things up perfectly, and you have a keystoning where this, if I were to make a perfect square, so if I line that up there, you can kind of see those lines there, and here's the guides, let's say, right? So I would probably straighten it out and then add a tiny bit of space, maybe around the right and left-hand side, perhaps. But it's an image that calls for perfection, and or my OCD goes to like, I want this thing to be perfect. And so usually we're used to looking at bridges facing us, right? You see where they come from and where they go to. And this is like underneath it, and it's majestic and grandiose. So I think it's a really cool perspective in that sense. I would just straighten this out and then maybe give it a little more breathing room once you do straighten this out. And if you need help with any keystoning or pre-transform or something, I can help you. And so I like the framing. I like the percentage of water to tree to sky. It's kind of like layers. And I wish there was more foreground though. So down here, right? I wish maybe this was foreground, that area, and then or even more. I wonder what it would look like with a little more foreground. I'm not sure what was down here. Maybe you cropped it out, but if you do that, maybe you could go lower. I wonder, just a perspective change, maybe a little bit lower and maybe a little more foreground, just to see what that would look like. I wonder what it would look like with the boat turned around, if the boat was backwards or if the boat was over here, or maybe even no boat. I wonder what that would look like as well. So maybe it's a composite shot. Maybe the water is a little slower shutter speed, so you get a little nicer blur. And then you're on a tripod, so you can composite this. So maybe the trees, maybe it's windy and you're getting the water to have that ripple effect, but maybe your trees are moving too much. So you want your trees on a faster shutter speed. You want your water in a slower shutter speed. You want to composite that, group those together in layers and masks, and then create a different mood. It'll be a different mood than what's here. But I do like the composition. Be careful about this bright spot in the sky up here, because it's kind of a little hot. So maybe you can reduce the highlights, kind of regain some of those highlights or the whites, go into your HDR setting and Adobe Camera Raw, see if you can regain some of those whites. Or if not, I could show you a way to gain some texture in there, because it would be nice to have some texture in those clouds instead of a bright spot. I do like the water lilies. I think these are water lilies. Think about maybe a dehaze filter in here. Maybe a little bit of contrast could help. Yeah, again, the keystoning to really make that perfect. And then one small side note is this bridge. You could desaturate this bridge a little bit. Maybe the reds are a little little too much. And then this spot over here is a little hot. So you can maybe, if you could see my marching ants right here, this area is a little hot. Hot meaning like a little bright. So I could probably tone that down just a hair and make it so it's not so bright. So your focus doesn't go to that spot. It should kind of work your way around. But I like this. These are hard images to master. Let's say you're taking basically on the world, and it's not easy to master so many acres. But great job in doing this, because there's a lot of elements in here. I think you did really well. Really like that bridge. It's cool. All right, so Sandra. So we just have one image from her. So kind of looks like Arizona. Maybe I'm wrong. Definitely a cool looking image. And I'd say Arizona because this background down here kind of looks like this red rock kind of from Arizona. It looks like you're higher up. So I like the fact that you're really high and looking down onto some lower plains. I think the focus is strong. I like the composition. I like how the left branch, this over here, and if I can just draw on this, you see this branch kind of follows this angle here. And I like how that follows that angle. It basically continues that diagonal line. I like the foreground, how basically this whole entire thing is the foreground. I mean, we're talking, you know, this entire area almost up to here is the foreground. And if I make this a little smaller, so it's almost more than a third, almost a half of the real estate. So I think that's successful. And I like this little branch up here to give it some context. You could easily just get rid of that with generative fill or content aware, but I kind of like how it's there, and I like that you left it. I like this protruding form out of this downward diagonal line. And I wonder what it would look like if you got a little lower and made this piece look a little more majestic. I wonder what that would look like. I kind of wish that the background didn't have as much fog, but maybe you can improve the contrast or something like this. This might look really good in black and white as well. Try maybe a longer lens or a shallower depth of field. I think you were at like 7.1. I looked at the metadata. And so, and you're on the brink of losing some focus in part of that. So I think, you know, with the lens that you shot it at, I think you used a 70 to 200 and you were at 70, if I remember correctly. The 70, you're at 70, and I think it was at 7.1. So if you could back up and use maybe a little longer lens and get some more bokeh, maybe that's helpful. It would be hard to really do some blur on the background because this bush is there's so many negative spaces in it. But I do like the color, the attitude, the shape, the composition, and this form that's protruding. So I think it's successful. Any questions on that? Stephen? All right, so we got some abstract images going on here. So what's working? I think composition, color, shape, form, movement, diffusion, even you want to call it osmosis, this sort of like blending into each other. I think it works. So if we start with one, let's talk about the first one here. Okay, so I like the flanking browns, and what I'm referring to is this brown and this brown, right? So these kind of flank the rest is kind of what I'm seeing. And it creates some balance, and I like the height and width ratio to that. I think the dark, this area here, I think this could maybe be reduced to maybe this or something. Maybe bring that dark just to be here and bring this over. If you brought this over to the left a little bit and made this black area a little smaller, I wonder what that would look like. Also this ear, so you can see that this is a person here. So I wonder if this ear, if it wasn't so red, what that would look like. Do you need red in the ear? I don't know. What if you put a little sliver of red in here, right? If you just created a tiny little sliver of red right here, or what if a sliver of red is right here? If you want red, I don't know if it needs to be in the ear. Maybe you could do red, you know, something like that. I like the red. I just think the ear doesn't need to be red, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, so this is our second one. All right, so I think you called this sidewalk. Sorry for zooming in so much. If you can get this from a sidewalk, that's pretty cool. I don't know how you did this, but definitely some intentional camera movement, and you can get some really cool effects with that. So slow shutter speeds and moving your camera on purpose. So I like it. I like the green. I like the negative and positive space. I like the upward movement. I'm not too keen on this vertical line on the left, and this is the part I'm referring to right here. So I'm not too keen on that, but on the other hand, if that wasn't there, what would that look like? Not sure, right? So maybe, just maybe, just a thought. What if all this had some sort of really faint double exposure? Or maybe if that faint double exposure was, somewhere just over here or something. I don't know. Maybe play around with all that negative space. I'm not a purist, let's just say it that way. But if you are a purist and you want to leave this in here, then that might be necessary. I think that it's kind of disrupting the flow of all of this diagonal movement to the left. And do you really need that is what I'm questioning. So of course you're the artist, so I think that you know better than me. So this is a curious image. It's dreamy, and I like the colors, I like the composition, I like the sort of real estate of the rocks, the water. I'm guessing this is rocks and water. And I like the transition. Basically, they're almost like tears as well. But I think a little darkening on the top might help, a little gradient, and then also some contrast within the image to bring out kind of more identifiable areas. If you want it less identifiable, then maybe not contrast. But I wonder what this would look like going through some maybe like color lookup tables and see what that would look like, and just change some of these tones here. Now, but I think contrast could definitely, so contrast, saturation, and then maybe a gradient on the top. But I love abstraction, and I know that's what you're looking for, so keep searching on that. I think that's a meaningful search for sure. Abstraction is really cool. You never know what you're gonna get. So, and then Suzy is our last one. All right. So, any questions so far? If anyone's got any, please stop me. All right, so just so we can see them all at once, and then we'll zoom in. We got our mob boss over here on the left. We got our triplets on the right, and our lonely guy in the middle, or girl, not sure. So what's working? I like the drama. I like the perspectives. I like the concepts, the composition, the colors, the black and white, and the lens choices. I think all of that is successful. So if we talk about the first one, where's our first one? Okay, so one thing I did here, oh, and then you shot it like that, actually, so sorry. I turned it around. I was thinking we read left to right. I know other cultures read right to left and some top to bottom, but English speakers, we read top left to bottom right. So I thought, what would that look like if I flipped it around? And then when I flipped it around, this area seemed like on the bottom left, it seemed like this was occupying a lot of space. So then what I was thinking, if I were to crop this, what would it look like? And if I used maybe this tool, yeah, so golden ratio, I just went up to here to this little icon. So golden ratio, I'm in the crop tool. What if I placed that to be, right here on the third, right? What if I placed it something maybe like that? I don't know. Is that better than this? I don't know. And is this better than that? I don't know either. Just a thought. So I'm not sure which is better, which is worse. I'm just kind of playing with it just to see. Sometimes flipping things around actually lead to somewhere where you wouldn't have gone if you hadn't flipped around. So that's just something I did. And then this area here is, I'm just darkening those highlights to get a little more texture, and you can see that there. I can just a tiny bit texture in those whites right there. So that's what I would do with this one. I'm just darkening. This one, I kind of added a couple things here. So what I felt might be beneficial is first, this is just darkening everything except for the dog. Okay. When I'm seeing, there's the mask right there, right? It's just that dog right there. And then this one, what I was doing is just a vignette around everything to darken. You can kind of see that ever so slightly. And then this one here is a contrast of that. Oh, you know what I did on the second one? That's a blur. So this is just, I'm just blurring the background. I was kind of thinking it's a little too identifiable, a little too sharp, and I'd like to bring more focus to the dog. So that's the before and after. I thought maybe just to bring a little more focus there, blur the background a little bit and put like more of a vignette around the dog and add a little bit of contrast. I thought might help, but I like the shot. I think it's working, definitely. So just a little more saturation, a little more contrast. All right, so this one, this is just a couple things. So this is a hard shot. This is a very hard shot. So I feel that this shot is unfinished. I do like your determination in this. And I like the character that you're building here. It's this kind of mob boss. I like the styling of the bow tie, the hat, the cigar, the smoke. The hat I felt could be a little darker, and that's why I just darkened a few things in here and blurred the background a tiny bit here. This is a little blur. This is a little curve here for the darkening of the hat. This is darkening the whites within the face a little bit. And then this is just to lighten a couple areas and just bring some of that out. So that's before and after. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But one thing I was thinking is that maybe if you had a desk in front of the dog, right? And maybe you could light this chair so it's a little more dramatic, and maybe the background is a little further away. And if there is a desk in front of him or her, what would that be? What would be on that desk? And what does that desk look like? Or maybe there's something else, or maybe it's the back of the head of someone else. And then the eyes, you know that the dog's being directed by a person because he's looking up, and we know that dogs look at our eyes. So what if that dog was looking straight onto camera? I kind of wish that dog was looking over here. But certainly, this is a tricky shot. There's all kinds of things you could do with this, whether it's a desk or, changing the background a little bit. But I like where you're going with this because there's so many things that you can take from this as a learning experience and then continue to do work in this vein. I like the variety. I like the outdoor shots, the studio shots, the level of difficulty, the lighting control that you possess. And I think there's a lot of really good things happening in all of these photos. So well done. All right. So that concludes our critique. Yeah, thank you as well. I'm just reading the chat. Will I be doing more of these? Yes, we will. Once you receive the video that we send you of the recording, there will be, I think, a survey included. So please fill that out and give us your feedback, because we think that these are beneficial to you guys. If you feel that you want a specific thing, feel free to let us know and we'll try to accommodate it for sure. And again, feel free to look into that one-on-one. We can go deep into lighting, Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, Luminar. If not, I could certainly talk about any post-production or pre-production things that you'd like. So, okay, if there's not any more suggestions, questions, comments, I'm gonna end the meeting. So thank you guys again. Take care. Have a good one.